Hi everyone, it's Don and I hope you're having a fantastic day. Well, all I can say is so many times you guys, and you probably agree, that when it comes to restrictions and rules for travel, that the cruise lines have been treated like they are the starting source of the virus. The cruise ships are basically, ground zero. That's the zombie apocalypse started at cruise ships, and cruise ships continue to be the only thing that's deadly out there, especially in the media. And as a perfect example is this story here today. So we all know, I did a story myself on that the CDC raised the level of warnings for anybody going on a cruise ship, introduced new restrictions and suggestions for testing and quarantining, and raised it to a level 4. Do not travel under any circumstances on a cruise ship. And you saw articles after articles after articles in the media all over the place. But did you also know on the same day, apparently, they issued warnings for airlines? What? They issued a warning for airlines. That's the first I've heard of this, right? Especially international travel. But it's very interesting, the difference between the cruise ships and the airlines when they come to suggesting the actual cause and the spread. When you go to the cruise lines, they say going on a cruise ship increases your risk of catching the virus. It does. It does increase your risk. That's the way they word it, right? But when we start talking about the airlines, they're a lot more dancing around. And here's a perfect example of what I mean. For this, I got to show my age, bring up the reading glasses, and read the article here with you. So read along with me. The CDC let's just start with air travel. Air travel requires spending time in security lines and airport terminals, which can bring you in close contact with other people. So see, it's not the airplanes. It's being in touch with other people in line. It's not the airlines. And frequently touched surfaces. Social distancing is difficult to do in busy airports and on crowded flights. You mean every flight that they fill the plane with because they're not social distancing on the plane? And you also can't sitting within 6 feet of others, sometimes for hours. Yeah, you think? How many flights have you known that are 40 minutes? Yeah, it may increase your risk of getting the virus. It may increase. Also, how you get to the airport, such as public transportation and ride sharing, can also increase your risk and exposure of the virus. So you see, it's not going on an airplane or anything like that. Really, crowded airplanes maybe, but being on an airplane is perfectly safe. You're going to get it by being in line and going through security and driving to the airport and maybe going to the gift shop to pick up a bottle of pop before you get on the flight. That's what's going to give it to you. The flight, maybe you'll get it, maybe, but you look out for all those other places, right? Where when they talk about a cruise ship, they say you will, that's the danger. The cruise ship is the danger. The place that has, 100,000 square feet on it that you can get around and open deck spaces and all the new protocols. It's all right, but they do have some recommendations for some travel. So get tested before your flight. 1 to 3 days. Get tested 3 to 5 days after your travel and stay home for 7 days. Even if you test negative, stay home for 7 days. If you don't get tested, it's safest to stay home for 14 days. And always follow your state and local recommendations. So that's kind of the kicker here. You see, the CDC does not have as big a control over cruise ships as they do international. They have more control, out of cruise ships than they do of flights and international flights. For instance, this is for international flights. It doesn't say anything about flying state to state. So California to New York or California to Florida or vice versa doesn't say anything about that. It doesn't have any recommendations for that. It just says follow your state safety advisory. So one of the reasons that they don't come out with this, if you notice, also it says you should get tested. That's great. And they say, look, that's the wording we use for cruise ships too. We use the word you should get tested in their upgrade to a level 4 travel advisory. Trouble is, the difference is, in their framework for cruising, it's mandatory that you get tested before getting on the cruise ship, and it's mandatory that you get tested after the cruise ship. But they don't mention that for airlines. It's not mandatory. There's no framework for flying. There was never a framework for flying issued by anybody. Now, I cannot blame the CDC wholly for this. There's a whole bunch of reasons, and that's because each state and each country has their own rules and regulations, and it's so hard to figure out sometimes, and it's no wonder that people get confused. I'll give you a perfect example. Canada, I can fly into the United States, no problem. If I fly to New York, I have to quarantine for 14 days if I fly into New York, and I have to have a test before I fly. So I get my test 3 to 5 days ahead of time. I fly into New York. I have to stay there for 14 days under quarantine. And when I come back to Canada, then I have to quarantine for 14 days as well. However, if I decide to go to Disney World in Florida, I don't need to get a test before flying into Florida. I can fly to Florida. I don't need to quarantine when I get there. I can go to Disney World. I can spend my holiday there. And then I do quarantine because it's Canada's restrictions for international travel when I come back. You see how, but every state is different. Every state has their own rules. Every state has their own regulations. Every country, everything. So you can't really come down too hard on the CDC. However, why is it not mandatory for international travelers to get tested before their flight and get tested when they come back? That should be mandatory for Let's forget about local travel and everything for now, but international travel, should that not be the case? Should not, if that's the case for cruise ships, why is it any different for international travel on flights? I don't get the difference. You should be making that mandatory. If it's that safety of a precaution and that's what we should be doing, do it for international travels. Surely you can institute that regulation instead of leaving it to the individual states' recommendations. All over the place. It would be far less confusing for people, not just cruisers, travelers, businessmen, everything. And I know a lot of businessmen end up flying to different countries every week, and it would be a hassle. Absolute hassle. But that could go by a case-by-case thing, could it not? I'm getting tested every time I land, but I have to fly in 6 days. But if I come up positive during any of these tests, and I'm isolating wherever I am. Easy, done, right? But those aren't the rules, those aren't the regulations, it's just suggested. But for the cruise ships, it's mandatory. Mandatory. I don't know about you, but the last time I looked, the cases have been blowing up all over the countries. All over the countries. And there has been very little to zero cruising anywhere. But there certainly has been flying. So why can we not tighten the restrictions there? Just issuing this little restriction and recommendation, unless you put some teeth behind it, means nothing. Means absolutely nothing. Is it mandatory or not? You should test. You should isolate. Stop confusing everybody and just come out with rules that are easy to follow countrywide. Pretty simple concept, you would think. Well, that's just, and I also want to point out, look at the media, right? You heard case after case after case. Oh, CDC recommends this, CDC upgraded this, CDC stops cruising, do not cruise on cruise ships. All stories and articles all over the place. I challenge you to find one that said airlines have been upgraded to a new restriction anywhere or new recommendations. I challenge you to find one, because I had to read through over 100 articles to find one. There you go. Well, I hope you appreciate this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. You want to see more tips, more tricks, more travel vlogs from around the world, hit that subscribe button. Till next time, have yourself a safe and a great vacation.